Hello everyone, this is part 18 of What If Naruto Was the God of Taijutsu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Destruction reigned everywhere as a single woman and who held onto a small girl hurried through the streets of Konoha. She had been enjoying a once quiet day in the village with her daughter while her husband and older son watched the Chunin exams. Now she ran through the streets littered with broken glass and flaming buildings, all the while being chased by a group of the same, strange robotic boy. "Where you going, B?" One of the Zakus let out a mechanical laugh as he propelled himself forward from fire that was spraying from his hands. The woman only ran faster. Suddenly, a kunai landed a ways ahead of her. It exploded with a loud bang and the woman was blown backwards. She turned her body and wrapped her arms tightly around her daughter as she s into the ground. Four Zakus slowly walked up and smiled sadistically down at her. Please, just let my daughter go." The little girl was sobbing painfully as the woman looked up at the robotic boys with a tear-stricken face of her own. One of the Zakus slowly bent down and looked at her, his face serious. The woman began to crawl backwards in fear but Zaku latched onto her arm, the sadistic smile was back. "I'll take her off your hands." He reached forward and grabbed onto the girl and began to yank her from her mother's grasp. "No, please, she's just a child," the woman shouted and pleaded as she held onto her daughter with all her might. "Shut up." Zaku's face scowled for a split second as he smacked the woman in the face and yanked the small girl free. "Mommy," the small girl shouted as she reached for her to no avail. Zaku smiled. "You'll never see mommy again, brat." Zaku's stomach opened and he reached into his stomach and pulled out a kunai. "No." The woman got up but was battered back down by two other Zakus. They each pinned an arm to the ground. "Enjoy the show," they said together in the same mechanical voice. "Please." The woman couldn't see anything at all as her tears blurred her vision. The next thing she heard, however, surprised her. "What the hell?" all four Zakus said simultaneously. "Why can't I move?" "Kiba. Choji. They're bound," Shikamaru shouted as he sat perfectly still, his hands still in the form of a seal. "About damn time," Kiba shouted as he ran forward and immediately ripped the girl from Zaku's arms. "I got you, mom." Choji pulled the woman out from the underneath the other two Zakus. She was sobbing harder now, mumbling barely coherent words of thanks. "Like hell am I going to let you heads get away with this?" All four Zakus present began glowing yellow. "Get out of there." Sakura ran towards them but it was too late. All four Zakus violently exploded, sending pieces of metal and debris everywhere. Sakura and everyone else covered their faces to protect themselves from the heat. "No!" Ino shouted as stared at the smoke that occupied the spots where her friend and teammate had just been. Akamaru, still shaped like Kiba, began sniffing loudly. He turned his head to the left and gazed upwards and gave a loud bark. Everyone followed his gaze. On top of the roof stood Shino and laying next to him in a heap were Kiba, Choji, and the mother and daughter. "Damn." Kiba rubbed his back as he sat up. "That was a painful ride but I have to hand it to you. It saved our asses." He turned and smiled up at Shino who had used his insects to save them by picking them up and dropping them off on the roof just before the explosions went off. Shino merely nodded down at him. "It would appear they are unharmed." Shikamaru, who had been tense just moments ago, relaxed his shoulders. "I need food." Choji raised his arm into the air as he gasped for breath. The mother and daughter sat on top of his stomach, looking completely bewildered by the sudden change of events. "Are you okay?" Shino bowed slightly as he stuck his one hand forward to help him up. You boys." The woman began choking on her words as tears began to slide down her face again. "You saved us." She jumped forward and tackled Shino in a hug. "Well, it wasn't anything special." Shino rubbed his head in embarrassment. It was rare that someone was willing to hug him. "Geez, look at the hero over here." Kiba laughed from where he sat before he too was tackled by the daughter who was also sobbing heavily. "Gah." Choji sat up and began taking in huge gulps of air now that the weight was off his body. "Somebody save us." The sound of people screaming from a few streets down reached the ears of everyone there. Get him down and join us ASAP. Shikamaru shouted as he and the others on the ground took to the roofs to save the other people in need. You heard him. Shino adjusted his glasses as his bugs began to gently let them all down. We have to hurry and save others. If you keep running, you'll be to the shelter in just a couple blocks. Kiba said as he stood up, the girl in his arms. You'll make it for sure, and if not, just holler and we'll be there to save you again. Thank you all so much. The woman continued to sob words of thanks into Shino's now drenched shoulder. We're genin of Konohagakure, Choji said as he stumbled up. The other two nodded. Saving people is what we do. Lee and Neji charged straight at each other inside the barrier that split them off from everyone else in Konoha. Naruto remained pinned to the cross, and Hinata, who had just quit struggling against the water ropes, held her head above the surface to watch. Meanwhile, Kabuto just continued to smile as evilly as ever. Take this fist of youth. Lee shouted as he threw the strongest punch he could in his weakened state. Neji ducked under it and continued forward, bringing his palms out in a thrust. Lee, you fool, you can't beat me. Lee turned his body sideways and just barely dodged the Urukan strike. He held his elbow high and brought it down. There is only one way to prove you wrong and save my friend. Neji's forearm blocked the strike. He knocked Lee's elbow back up with such force that he stumbled backwards. It's not about right and wrong. Neji yelled as his Urukan connected with Lee's stomach, sending the genin splashing into the ankle-deep water. He is a jonin controlling my body. I might as well be stronger than normal. Meanwhile, you are completely worn out. Fate isn't on your side in this, Lee. Shut up. Lee rose up to his feet. Even if I did believe in fate and knew it was against me, you think I would just sit here and do nothing? He glared darkly at his ex-teammate. I will push myself past my limits and destroy fate with my own two hands. Neji's eyes widened as he stared at the one boy who he had come closest to calling friend. So be it, Lee. If my body crushes you, I have nothing to do with it. That is the curse of fate that now binds me. Hinata was right, Lee said as he slipped into a stance that made it look like he was ready to start a race. You simply use fate as an excuse to hide behind. Neji was surprised. Lee's voice had come from above, but he was still right in front of him. His body jumped backwards on its own accord just before Lee's foot s into the ground, sending water spraying everywhere. Neji blinked a couple times as the water hit his eyes. When his vision cleared, he saw 5 different Lees all around him. You're using after images again. I'm surprised you have the speed for that. Neji replied in monotone as his body automatically reacted and blocked Lee's next attack. The image of Lee in front of him was smiling. I do not need to open a single gate to perform such a trick. Lee's voice jumped to a new location every word. Meanwhile, an image of himself remained behind. You know the problem with after images? Kabuto asked loudly. Lee didn't respond as he appeared behind Neji with his foot high in the air. They make it easy to predict your next move. A wall of earth rose up right next to Neji and Lee's foot s into it. Yow. Lee was skipping and holding onto the foot that had smacked into the wall. He hadn't even noticed Neji form the seals for that move, it had been so quick. I told you, Lee. You're a fool. Neji spun around in a sweep that caught Lee while he was still skipping. Lee was flipped so his body was horizontal with the ground, and as he began to fall, Neji drilled his elbow into his solar plexus. Lee spit B as he was full force into the ground at Neji's feet. If you had kicked at him at your full strength, you would have easily shattered that wall. However, you held back for fear of hurting your friend. Kabuto cackled as he clapped his hands. Your previous words and your current actions are contradicting each other. I thought you would said you would fight him to save your friend. This isn't a fight. It's a pummeling. Lee didn't move from the water or give an answer. He appeared to be unconscious. Kabuto's face suddenly twisted into one of boredom. Finish him off, Neji. I thought I would get some good entertainment before I had to get serious, but it would appear I was mistaken. No, Hinata shouted. Don't worry. I'll bring him back to life. I'm capable of it, after all. Kabuto chuckled as he turned and began walking towards Naruto. He stopped just in front of the blonde. Are you ready, Naruto-kun? Naruto gave him a feral grin. Try whatever the hell you want. The fox is staying inside me. I've protected this village for 13 years and I'm sure as hell not about to fail now. Kabuto smirked as he gazed at each of Naruto's hands which still dripped down onto the wooden cross. As I explained earlier, I am before anything, a scientist. I was also Orochimaru's personal doctor and as such, surgery happens to be a specialty of mine. You plan to see the fox out of me. Naruto continued to hold his feral smile. Precisely. Kabuto reached into his back pouch and pulled out a kunai in the shape of a scalpel. You can think of this cross that you are bound to as a special operating table which allows me extract special chakra, in this case, your prisoner. That extraction may have to wait, your pawn is about to be knocked for a loop. Kabuto spun around at Naruto's words. Neji had slowly walked up to Lee, raised his foot above his face. I really am sorry, Lee. He brought his foot down. A moment later and he was dazed and flying high in the air. What? Kabuto's amused smile returned. Looks like I might get some more entertainment after all. He had just barely caught a glimpse of what had happened. Lee had reacted to Neji's strike by punching the bottom of his sandal with such force that it had sent the Hyuga genius flying. Never think I am down. Lee appeared in the air in front of his opponent. You idiot. You should have gone for Kabuto. He was wide open. Neji brought his arms together in an X just in time. Lee's fist S into his guard and sent him flying towards the ground. Neji began running through seals. As he approached the earth he stuck his hands out. His palms hit the ground and then the rest of his body did, but instead of S against it and creating a splash of water, mud was flung everywhere. Neji had turned the ground to mud to soften his blow. His mud-covered form got to his feet. Neji wanted nothing more than to wipe himself down or at least shake some of it off, but he wasn't the one in control. This is an official match, Neji. I cannot abandon it. Lee landed not too far from him. He appeared to stand much higher now as Neji was knee-deep in mud while he was only ankle-deep in water. Kabuto clapped loudly. That is a good fake answer, but I'm not buying it. The real reason you are fighting your friend is because it keeps me from making a move. You've realized that it is hard for me to mask both minds at once, and so you are keeping that body busy and ultimately buying yourself time for someone to break in and save you. Lee cursed internally. He had been figured out. Of course, I could easily focus both his mind and my own on the same task of KU, but this is much more amusing. Kabuto adjusted his glasses. Now fight for me, my pawns. Neji completed another set of seals and even more mud began to crawl up his body, completely covering him from head to toe, leaving only his eyes visible. The mud then hardened. Rock armor. Lee's bushy brows shot up in surprise. This was the true purpose behind Kakashi-sensei teaching Doton. Neji stepped up from the mud hole he was in. Doton is the best ninjutsu for defending. Combine that with my already powerful defensive capabilities and I become untouchable. No matter how much speed you have, it won't help you. That is how powerful I've become. Lee shook his head. Having power is not what makes you strong, Neji. I can still win this. Neji scowled. He didn't want to be fighting right now, but Lee's attitude was getting on his nerves anyways. Not more of that believe in yourself garbage. He replied snidely. You should try it sometime. Lee was offered his rival at second later. Neji raised his hand and blocked Lee's punch with his palm. Lee stepped back and let out another yelp. Before he could move, Neji stepped forward and buried his palm in Lee's gut. Lee stumbled backwards but managed to stay standing. B rolled out from the corners of his mouth. That was a Yuokan strike as well. Not only does my armor protect me from all kinds of physical attacks, but it lets me use my own attacks at will. Neji was running at Lee as he talked. This is why it would be best if you just quit before I KO you. You know I cannot give up. Lee stepped backwards and dodged Neji's first swing. He knocked Neji's second attack to the side and spun around, delivering a strong kick to Neji's head. It connected, but Neji didn't even flinch. You're out of strength, Lee. Neji knocked Lee's foot aside and swung forward. Lee vanished a second later. I am not out of speed. Lee shouted as he appeared behind him. Kaiten. Lee was blown backwards by Neji's spiraling shield. He landed on his feet and was gone a second later. Give up, Lee. Don't make me hurt you. Quit sprouting the same line. Lee appeared next to Spinning Shield and kicked at it again. He bounced back lightly before attacking it again. He was once again repelled back a couple feet. This time he skid to a stop. He looked up and Neji's rotation was still active, but he felt a sudden jolt of pain in his shoulder. A second later and it looked like Neji was charging at him. Lee was knocked down hard as he felt an invisible attack hit his face. The time delay genjutsu. Lee cursed and rolled through the water away from Neji, who appeared to him to be punching where he had just been. He was suddenly picked up by what felt like a kick and sent skipping across the water. Lee. Neji's voice was pleading now. Please, you don't have what it takes to break a genjutsu. So what? Lee pulled himself up slowly, agonizingly. If I perceive everything 2 seconds slower than that just means I have to be 2 seconds faster. As he talked, Neji already appeared to be running forward. Lee breathed in deeply and closed his eyes. His mind slowly emptied out as he erased all sense of feeling. He could no longer hear Neji's steps as he ran at him. He couldn't see him as he pulled his Yuuken strike back. The only thing he could feel was his body, his breathing. The way his fist felt when he clenched it tightly. I can do this, only his voice filtered through. Neji pulled his palm back. This may be the end, Lee. He only wished he could close his eyes as he swung forward. He couldn't watch as he pummeled someone to death without being in control anymore. Neji and Kabuto's eyes widened in surprise as Neji's attack was deflected. Before he could even ask how he had Lee's fist right in his face. His mud armor cracked apart around his upper body and he was jarred backwards. I felt it connect. Lee slowly opened his eyes. Yosh, I can do this. He ran forward and swung his fist. Neji raised his arm to block Lee's attack, but Lee suddenly passed through him and another one from behind the first delivered a powerful kick that connected with his ribs. Neji's mud armor cracked apart more and this time whole pieces went flying off. Kabuto's smile got bigger. Interesting, he used his afterimage ability as a screening for his attack. Not only that, but he is fighting on par with someone while 2 seconds behind. Hinata smiled despite the situation. Lee Senpai has memorized the patterns of attack used in the Yuuken style. It's that memory that is letting him predict Neji's moves. Neji ducked under Lee's kick. He then swung at him with both palms. Lee placed his hands on top of Neji's outstretched arms and used them to flip himself into the air. What? As Lee completed his flip, he brought the bottom of his foot into the back of Neji's head. He pushed off with all his might and Neji's face straight into the ground. The mud armor around Neji's whole upper body crumpled away completely with that blow. Lee landed a few feet away and spun around. He was immediately running forward again. Kaiten. Neji activated his spinning shield as Lee jumped in the air and began spinning around at incredible speeds himself. Konoha Senpu. Lee's kick had been flying at the reverse of Neji's spin and so when it connected it immediately stopped Neji's spin hard. Neji felt his whole body lock up from the force of his rough stop. Impossible, not only did he predict that I would use the Kaiten but he even put enough speed behind his kick to stop it. Neji. Lee shouted as he stepped forward and swung his fist with all his might. Neji's body was still locked up and he could do nothing as Lee's fist buried itself in his unprotected cheek. He was into the water with a huge splash. Lee stood triumphantly over his body panting heavily. Neji felt his arms try to move upwards on their own but they collapsed back down. His body had it. Lee had won. No one breathed a word for a whole 30 seconds as Lee and Neji stared hard at each other. Finally, Lee broke the silence. Neji, is my time back to normal? He asked hopefully. Neji sighed in exasperation. He wished he hadn't because water leaked into his mouth. He spit it out immediately. Idiot. Of course your time is back, I can't even move. Lee let out a breath he looked like he had been holding. Good. That will make things much easier. He turned towards Kabuto. You can't really mean to fight him, look how worn out you are. Neji attempted to reason with his ex-teammate once again. You couldn't even open the gates when you fought me. Lee shook his head. I chose not to open them. What? Neji's eyes widened in surprise. Neji. Lee said. You know what the biggest difference between you and everyone else I fought is? Neji's silence was answer enough. The biggest difference between you and them was they tried their hardest. Everyone else put forth everything they could and mustered all the strength in their be. They put countless hours into training believing it would pay off one day. Lee closed his eyes. The images of Naruto, Dosu and Haku all came to his mind instantly. You do not do that. You work at things the minimal amount and master it. Lee turned and looked at him. You can blame it on fate all you want, But there is only one thing keeping you from overcoming that seal that binds your movements. And that one thing is yourself. Mokuton no Jutsu. Yamato and Hashirama shouted at the same time. More giant branches of trees ripped their way from the ground, cracking the concrete and splitting the buildings. The battling shinobi who were standing there were forced to move or risk getting caught in the attack. The massive roots into each other, but Hashirama's broke through and continued on towards Yamato. My ability isn't strong enough, Yamato cursed as he jumped out of the way of the winding branches. Suddenly many small branches broke free from the large one and shot straight at him. Before Yamato could react, he was bound completely. I've got you. Hayate jumped upwards and the branches binding him apart. They both fell towards the ground and landed nimbly on their feet on top of one of the many giant branches that covered the streets of Konoha now. Thanks. Yamato sighed in relief. He thought he had been done for. I told you I would back you up, thanks are not necessary. Hayate held his blade at the ready. More branches were coming at them. Can you see me a path through? Yamato took a running stance. I'm going to have to try to make up for his power with speed. Of course I can. Hayate immediately began to run at the many branches that were converging on them. Yamato was right behind him as he hacked and his way through the numerous wooden appendages. More and more of them kept coming though, and soon they were completely surrounded by wood that threatened to crush the life of them out of them at any moment. Get down! Hayate shouted as he raised his blade high. Yamato dove to the floor just in time. Hayate swung his blade in a complete circle and all the branches around them fell apart seconds later. Yamato rolled to his feet and was back off instantly. Hashirama stood on the largest root that came from the ground and Yamato was forced to jump a whole couple stories just to reach him. He landed in front of the former Hokage in a crouch. Impressive that you made it this far. Hashirama brought his hands up in the form of a seal as he talked. I won't let you. Yamato extended his hand forward and wood shot from his arm and immediately bound Hashirama's hands together in a wooden box. You can't form seals like that, he said as he charged forward. Binding my Mokuton with Mokuton is a smart move. Hashirama nodded in appreciation at Yamato as he slid one leg back slightly. I am honored to be praised by you. Yamato jumped in the air and kicked at his idol. The Shodai raised the wooden block and Yamato's kick connected with that, skidding the Shodai back from the force. Yamato landed and swung a fist at him next. Hashirama ducked and moved forward, bringing his head up as he did, catching Yamato in the chin and knocking him backwards. Before Yamato had a chance to recover, he felt the Shodai's foot bury itself into his stomach. To keep himself from falling backwards, Yamato shot out two spikes of wood from his hands that he used to anchor himself to the giant branch they fought on. I guess I was too full of myself for thinking I could best you in taijutsu even with your hands bound. Yamato pulled the small spikes up and held them as two small spears in each hand. Maybe so, but you use your Mokuton wisely. You know you are not as powerful as I am with it, so you use it in little ways that work well. It may be rude of me, but I failed to catch the name of the successor of my ability. Shodai-sama. Yamato felt his mouth go dry at the praise he received from his idol. Your name, Hashirama repeated as he ran forward. They refer to me as Yamato now. He brought his spears up and blocked the Shodai's two-handed swing. Both of his spears were splintered apart and the Shodai's attack carried on towards his face. Out of the way, Hayate shoved Yamato to the right and then jumped to the left. Hashirama's attack missed completely and he turned to look at the swordsman before charging at him. No you don't, Yamato shouted as 8 square branches of wood sprout from both of his arms and zigzagged towards the Shodai. Your opponent is me. If that is what you wish. Hashirama spun around and prepared for the wood attack. Before he had a chance to react though, he felt Hayate's blade pierce him in the heart from his back. As the blade exited from his sea, he brought his bounded hands backwards and them free. Yamato and Hayate realized at the same time the mistake they made. Mokuton no Jutsu. The wood from Yamato's arm veered off as Hashirama took control of them. They spread around him and then closed back in right on Hayate, who was directly behind. Hayate went to pull his blade out and jump away, but the Shodai grabbed onto the part still protruding from his sea. What? Hayate let his surprise cost him as his body was battered from all sides by Yamato's attack. He fell to the ground in a mess. Hayate-san. Yamato shouted as he began to run for his fallen comrade. Now is not the time to get distracted. The Shodai shouted as another giant root ripped apart the ground behind him. It stood 10 stories straight tall before flung itself towards the ground like a giant tentacle. You won't do that. It'll crush you too. Yamato already knew it was pointless as he yelled it. The Shodai would just regenerate while he and Hayate would be crushed. I got you guys. A giant chooser yelled as he moved forward and grabbed onto the branch. Chooser-san. Yamato was so glad to see the big man lending him aid. Kage Nui no Jutsu. The Shodai was bound by a set of black tentacles that sprung from the ground a second later. Yamato. Get Hayate out from there. Shikaku was crouched down a little ways behind Chooser. Right. Yamato nodded gratefully and ran forward. Just then though, the sound of more roots breaking free from the ground caused him to turn around. On either side of Chooser, 2 giant roots rose that were just as tall as him. Oh boy, Chooser could do nothing as he was already having trouble holding onto one root. The other 2 wrapped around his waist and legs and pulled him backwards and then him into the ground. His body crushed many buildings and many shinobi who weren't able to move in time. Not good. Shikaku also lost control of his shadow sewing technique when he lost Chooser's shadow. Before he was able to make another move, a bunch of miniature roots sprout up from below his feet. He was bound and into the ground only a moment later. The giant root that Chooser had been holding began descending again. I won't let you crush him. Yamato ran through more seals. The root slowed its descent towards the ground and just as it was 10 feet above them it stopped completely. Yamato dropped to his knee, panting heavily and sweat rolling from his forehead and off his chin. Hayate-san, get up. Hurry. He knew that Hayate couldn't hear him but he spoke anyways. Ugh. Hayate groaned as he slowly opened his eyes and began to pick himself back up. His vision was still incredibly dark, he thought as he sat up. Then he realized it wasn't his vision that was dark but he was inside of a giant shadow. He immediately looked above him and saw a giant root looming terrifyingly over his head. I suggest you move. Yamato and I are wrestling for control over the root. It is only a matter of moments before I win. Hashirama spoke from directly in front of the shinobi. But he'll be crushed too. Hayate said aloud as he stumbled to his feet. He seemed prepared to make to save your life. The Shodai turned his head slightly to gaze at the swordsman. So what will you do now? A foolish question. I'll save him and myself. Hayate immediately ran past the Shodai and towards Yamato. What are you doing? Yamato shouted. Get out from under here. Not without you. Hayate ran up next to him. You are the one who must defeat him. Yamato chuckled darkly. Defeat him? How? He's invincible. It's a miracle we've managed to last this long. Nothing is impossible and no one is invincible. I'm sure you'll find a way. Hayate bent down and rested his hand on Yamato's shoulder. We need to both survive first though. He turned his gaze back up towards the massive root that could crush them at any second. I'm losing it. Sweat was beginning to pool at the spot Yamato was kneeled at. The root gave a sudden lurch and Hayate narrowed his eyes. He stood up straight and angled his sword. Damn it! Yamato roared as he lost control. The root down on top of the other one, enveloping them both and creating a loud crash. Yamato! Hayate! Shikaku yelled from where he remained bound. The sight of shimmering to the side caught his eyes. He turned to see a barrage of shuriken and kunai flying at him. Protect him! Another group of shuriken came from behind and collided with the first group. All of them landed uselessly in front of Shikaku's face. Phew! Too close, too close. He breathed a sigh of relief. The roots around him finally loosened up, probably because the Shodai had been crushed. He easily wiggled his way out and then ran towards the spot where Yamato and Hayate had been. Where do you think you're going? A group of Otogakure shinobi landed in front of him. Kage Nui no Jutsu. His shadow shot forward and black spikes speared the men before they even knew what happened. He didn't even break pace and immediately reached the 2 roots. When he reached the top of the newest one he was surprised to see a giant fissure in the spot where the 2 of them had been. Just as he saw it a hand reached out and grabbed onto the ledge around. A moment later and Hayate's panting face appeared. He pulled himself up until his waist was out and then he gave a mighty heave. Yamato's face appeared above next and he placed both arms over top of the ledge. You guys are all right. Shikaku ran forward and knelt down next to the 2 panting men who were both completely out of the fissure. That your work? He nodded towards the swordsman. Hayate nodded back. I barely made it. These roots are stronger than most rock. That's our shodai for you. Yamato was chuckling as he fell down on his back. He gazed at the sky and began laughing even louder. We made it. It's not over yet. Hayate rose to his feet. We have to find a way to defeat him. Quote. But how? He's immortal. Shikaku rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Besides, even if he wasn't, the shodai has the body of the sturdiest tree. It would take a great power to bring him down if he was even alive. What did you say? Yamato asked as he bolted up suddenly. Shikaku looked at him in surprise. It would take a great power to bring him down. No, before that. Yamato was on his feet now, his eyes wide. The shodai has the body of the sturdiest tree. That's it. That's the answer. Shikaku and Hayate looked at each other and then back at him. What's the answer? They asked at the same time. Yamato opened his mouth to say more, but the sound of wood splintering apart stopped him as the shodai busted free from where he had been imprisoned. No time to explain. I need you two to back me up as I prepare my technique. What are you going to do? Shikaku asked in exasperation. Let it go. Hayate placed his hand on Shikaku's shoulder. He's found the answer. We'll leave it to him. He turned to the shodai. Here he comes. Hashirama was running at them while going through even more seals. More branches sprout out from the wood they were fighting on and launched towards them. Shikaku clucked his teeth. Fine. You better hurry, Yamato. I'm already on it. Yamato had his eyes closed and held a single seal. Both men could feel an incredible amount of chakra surging from his body. Let's go, Hayate said as he turned and began running forward. Damn, no choice. Shikaku ran through a set of seals. Kage Nui no Jutsu. His shadow sprang to life once again. Any time a branch approached Yamato, his shadow needles would strike at it. Hayate chopped and his way forward towards the Hashirama. Within seconds he made it to the man. This fight ends now. Hayate brought his sword up high and swung it down. I hope for the village's sake, it does. Hashirama stepped to the side and dodged the sword. Hayate immediately stopped his sword and changed its direction, forcing him to jump over it now. He performed a flip in the air and brought his foot down over the top of Hayate's head. Hayate held his sword up, but the shodai continued his attack forward. Hayate's sword through his leg at the knee, but the foot continued forward and the swordsman right in the nose. Hayate stumbled backwards, and by the time he settled back into his stance, Hashirama's leg was already reattached. Crafty, using that regeneration to your advantage like that. If only I had any say in the matter. Hashirama stepped forward but jerked to a stop. His whole body went rigid. Hayate looked at him in amazement as a small twig broke free from the skin at the shodai's skin. The twig continued to grow and then a small leaf sprouted on it. Suddenly, many other small twigs began to break away from his body. Hashirama reached his hand forward and touched one. Ah, I see. What an interesting strategy. Hashirama turned his eyes toward Yamato. Shikaku's eyes widened. I see, it takes a senju's cells to create the wood techniques. You're taking control of the cells in his body to permanently change him. Yamato nodded as he opened his eyes. I just hope I have the chakra to finish this. That won't be necessary, the metamorphosis is already underway. Allow me to help you. The shodai raised his fingers up and formed a seal. Suddenly a boom of chakra erupted across the area. What's he doing? Yamato almost lost control of his technique in his surprise. He's going to destroy what I'm trying to do. Shikaku shook his head. Just watch. The small twigs suddenly sprang to life and continued to grow much faster. Soon the shodai was completely covered in a twisting mass of wood that was beginning to extend towards the sky. Leaves began to sprout from the top and roots shot forward from the bottom and their way into the ground. We got to move, Hayate shouted as he ran up to the two of them. He noticed that all other shinobi in the area were already fleeing the scene. The technique, Yamato protested. It's already beyond your control. Shikaku grabbed onto him and yanked him backwards. We're moving, now. Yamato nodded dumbly as he saw the trunk of the massive growing tree expand closer and closer towards them. They all turned and immediately began to retreat deeper into the village. Elsewhere in the village, Kakashi and the Nadaime turned their heads as they saw the giant tree continuing to grow much taller than the buildings of Konoha. Brother, so you're leaving one last gift to the village? Tobarama smiled as he looked at it. The tree finally stopped growing, but it was already hundreds of stories high, making it visible to everyone in the village no matter where they were. Not only was it high, but its branches were huge, hanging deep into the village. Big, lush green leaves covered the whole top of it. All fighting in the village temporarily stopped as everyone turned to look at it. Yamato stared in amazement at it. Did I do that? His knees buckled and he slipped down to them. Shikaku smiled from next to him. Kind of. You started the process. Shodai-sama merely finished it. When he channeled all that chakra into his already morphing cells, he greatly strengthened the effects. You could say he found his own way out. Heiichi sheathed his sword. How was he capable of doing that against the reviver's will? Shikaku scratched his head. He probably cheated the jutsu. He channeled the chakra in order to perform a powerful technique, knowing that his chakra would do this instead. Shikaku opened his mouth to say more, but a heavy breeze passed through the area. The leaves of the giant tree rustled. Individually the leaves were quiet, but the millions of them together made a loud noise audible to those below. That wasn't what caused Shikaku to quit speaking, however. No, what caused him to stop talking with the strange tiny glowing orbs that fell from the tree. Is this snow? A random nearby shinobi asked. Idiot. Have you ever seen green snow? Another shinobi asked. Then what is it? Hell if I know. Before the two could continue, an explosion pulled everyone back to their senses. The Otogakure shinobi had gotten over their surprise and were attacking again. They all rushed forward into battle. Yamato landed down from the building just as an exploding tag landed in front of him. He had no chance of dodging. The tag exploded and he covered his face, waiting to be incinerated, yet nothing happened. Yamato slowly lowered his hands and opened his eyes. The green orbs in front of him shimmered brightly. Zaku stood with his back to a wall as the rookies surrounded him. They didn't dare attack him though, for he held a kunai to a young man's tea. Help me, the man begged. Quiet. Zaku pressed the kunai tighter to him. Let him go. Kiba shouted. Zaku began chuckling. Then he broke into wild laughter. Say goodbye. You couldn't save everyone. He began glowing yellow just as the green orbs began to fall around the section of the village they stood in as well. Zaku exploded. No. Everyone shouted at once. The man disappeared in the explosion. Kiba dropped to his knees and his fist into the ground. Damn it, damn it, damn it. He shouted as he continued to punch the ground. Sakura and Ino averted their eyes sadly. Everyone, Shino's voice was laced with awe, not an expression often heard from him. So naturally everyone turned to see what he was staring at. The man who had been caught in the explosion lay unconscious on the crowd, but otherwise completely unharmed. What the hell happened? Multiple people asked at once. Just then they saw all the Zakis in the area immediately taking off towards the giant tree located towards the edge of the village. They all immediately jumped to the highest nearby roof. It wasn't only the Zakis. Every single shinobi in the village, friend or foe, was making their way with great haste to the tree. Shikamaru rubbed his chin. Whatever just happened has to do with that tree. That means it has to be defended no matter what. We're going to, aren't we? Shino sounded apprehensive about the idea. Of course. Kiba and Akamaru were already off. Kiba. Wait. Sakura was after him a moment later. Soon the rest of the genin were after them. Yamato. Yamato immediately stopped running and looked around. That had been Hashirama's voice. Shodai-sama. Yamato felt kind of stupid. He had seen the Shodai turn into a tree. There was no way he was talking to him. No one else had obviously heard it as everyone was running past him and towards the tree. Yamato, this is my final gift towards the village I love so much. Yamato realized a moment later that he wasn't crazy and that the Shodai's voice was coming from the green orbs. This jutsu doesn't have enough power to protect everyone, but anyone not bearing a weapon I can protect from harm. Hashirama's voice continued quickly. These orbs are what saved me too, then. Yamato realized now why he was still alive. I owed you a special favor. You are the only shinobi this jutsu will be able to protect. Yamato's face fell at that. You shouldn't have wasted it on me. He shouted at the orbs. No, I wanted it to be you. Yamato's eyes widened in surprise. Yamato, I'm glad Mokuton was entrusted to you. I can rest knowing it is in good hands. Yamato. The wood user jumped in surprise as Kakashi landed next to him. What's going on here? The copy ninja asked. Civilians everywhere are suddenly being saved by these strange green orbs. It's Shodai-sama, Yamato choked out, his vision slightly clouded by tears. He's protecting the village. So it is that tree. How youthful. Guy landed next to both of them a moment later. They all turned towards the massive trunk of the tree. Hundreds of Konoha shinobi stood on its roots and on its trunk. Yet hundreds of Otogakure shinobi were charging at it. The sight of the Nadaime and Hayate fighting caught Kakashi's eyes. I got to go. He immediately took off towards the trunk. Yamato and Guy were about to follow, but Hiro landed in front of them. Oh my god, you're multiplying. Yamato shouted in terror as he jumped backwards. How rude. Hiro laughed loudly, contradicting the words he just spoke. I'm afraid the controller of my body won't allow me to let you pass here, Guy. If you want to protect that tree, you're going to have to stop me first. Fine by me. Guy settled into his fighting stance. Yamato, get to the tree. Protect Shodai-sama's final memory with your life. Right. Yamato nodded. He flipped up to the roof of the nearest uncollapsed building and moved onwards towards the tree. He looked back just in time to see Guy and Hiro begin to exchange blows. He landed on the tree and immediately was swarmed by a group of Otogakure shinobi. Mokuton no Jutsu. The wood of the tree they were fighting on sprang to life and immediately sucked the group in front of him into itself. Nice. Yamato smiled at how little chakra that technique had taken. The tree had supplied most of it for him. While fighting here, he was at the advantage. The sound of fire reached his ears just moments later. He turned and saw every single Zaku in the village getting closer to the tree. Stop them. A hailstorm of kunai and shuriken immediately wiped out the first wave, but there were still hundreds more on the way. Yamato sighed. He had just fought and won against the Shodai, and yet all that had done was centered everything on one area, giving him no time to rest. I guess this is what it means to be at war. You aren't going any farther. Hiruzen shouted as he s his pole into Orochimaru's body, blasting him backwards and through a couple buildings. Asuma and Kurenai landed down next to him. We took care of the snakes, Asuma said as he readied his blades again. Things had gotten much quieter over here now. They were probably the only 4 shinobi not at the tree right now, and if they had their way, Orochimaru wouldn't be getting even a single step closer. The house that Orochimaru had finally stopped in exploded as a group of giant snakes were summoned from the inside of it. Asuma sighed. So much for having taken care of the snakes. I leave it to you, son. Hiruzen gave him a small smile. Yeah, take advantage of my kindness. Asuma nodded to Kurenai, who was already preparing another genjutsu for the snakes. Sarutobi-sensei. Orochimaru appeared in front of the old shinobi, his eyes flared with fury and his sword swinging down. You were quick to anger as always, Orochimaru. Sarutobi spun his staff around and knocked Orochimaru's blade to the side. Before Orochimaru could react, he spun it the other way and it s the Sannin in the tea. Orochimaru gagged and began to cough so badly he doubled over and spit went flying. A second later and his whole body heaved. Suddenly he spit out another one of himself that had the lower half of a snake. Now you're mine. Sarutobi wasn't able to do anything as Orochimaru's surprise attack caught him off guard. Orochimaru s right through him with his blade, only for him to burst into smoke. A shadow clone. Doton, Doryuden no Jutsu. Orochimaru spun around to see the head of a mud dragon spraying a group of mud bullets at him. Kaiten, Karyuden no Jutsu. Hiruzen then spit fire from his mouth onto the muddy bullets, creating balls of molten fire that rained down on the Sannin. Kuchio's no Jutsu. Orochimaru s his palms on the ground. A giant purple snake much bigger than all the ones he summoned before appeared coiled around him. The molten bullets s into the giant snake, which let out a loud hiss in irritation. Sarutobi, that's Manda, the Lord of Snakes. An eye appeared on the staff that used to be Enma as it warned the Hokage. The old man only nodded. I know. Orochimaru is beginning to get serious. Damn you, Orochimaru. The snake continued to hiss as it talked. The price for this will be high. Orochimaru cackled as the snake uncoiled from around him. I've already paid the ultimate price, I'm afraid. The giant snake looked at him curiously before it turned its gaze at Sarutobi. It's been a long time since I've had monkey, sounds delicious. The snake lurched at Sarutobi, who immediately jumped high into the air. Enma, extend, he shouted as his staff grew to incredible lengths. He swung it in a long arc, and before the snake could react, he s it in the head. You've dropped your guard, sensei. Orochimaru appeared above the old man and swung his sword down. Sarutobi flipped so that he was upside down and caught the sword with both of his sandals. Think again, my foolish student. Hiruzen spun around, snapping Orochimaru's wrist and breaking the sword free from his grasp. By then the staff had retracted and he was already bringing it back forward when he noticed Manda was already coming at them again. The only thing he had time to do was throw Enma towards the ground as the snake ate both Orochimaru and him. Sarutobi! Enma shouted as he transformed back into a monkey. Hokage-sama! Kurenai shouted in horror as she watched what had just happened. He'll be alright. Asuma dropped the last snake of the group they were fighting. How can you be so calm after watching your own father getting eaten? Kurenai turned and yelled at him. Getting upset won't help matters. The best way to help my old man is to take care of that snake. Asuma slowly approached Manda as he talked. The snake smiled hungrily at the two jonin. Not a moment later though, and Enma's fist s into the bottom of the snake's jaw. Get ready to experience pain. The monkey growled. Enma, I'm going to enjoy eating you yet. The snake immediately snapped down at the monkey. The snake s pointlessly into the ground. What? It looked around in surprise to see his whole world was dark. Genjutsu. You guessed it. Asuma swung his chakra knives at the giant snake. To his surprise they failed to pierce his skin. The snake chuckled as it turned its head towards them. My scales are harder than diamond. It'll take more than your puny blades to see me. The snake lurched at the two of them with speed much too fast for its size. It's using its other senses to find us. Kurenai shouted as she and Asuma just barely dodged the strike of the snake's head. Then do something about them. Asuma yelled back. He and Enma jumped at the snake at the same time. Remember not to hurt him badly enough to dispel him or Sarutobi will be teleported with him. Enma shouted. TCH, troublesome. Shikamaru's favorite phrase summed up the situation perfectly. Orochimaru, you fool. Sarutobi shouted as he delivered 3 swift punches at his student. Orochimaru blocked the strikes with his forearms. What's the matter, sensei? Orochimaru grinned wickedly as he and his sensei continued to exchange swift taijutsu strikes. You don't like being inside the belly of a snake. Sarutobi jumped and delivered a powerful kick that knocked the Sannin back into the sticky, pink wall that was part of the giant snake. To his surprise, Orochimaru sunk into the wall. Surprised. This is my battlefield. You can't win here, Sarutobi-sensei. Orochimaru's tongue, wrapped around a kunai, shot from the top right part of the wall. Sarutobi went to move but couldn't as Orochimaru's hands grabbed at his ankles from below. What? He was only able to turn his body slightly and let the kunai pierce his shoulder instead of his heart. Sarutobi grabbed onto the tongue and yanked it hard, pulling Orochimaru's face from the wall. Hello, sensei. Orochimaru spoke despite his tongue being held onto. Sarutobi pulled harder to get face closer but suddenly Orochimaru's legs shot out from the left and right side of the wall. They stretched impossibly long and the bottom of his feet s into the side of Sarutobi's head. Damn. Sarutobi let the tongue go which immediately retracted. He then ripped his feet free and stumbled forward and away from all of his students' appendages. When he spun around however, they were all gone. It looked like they had never been there at all. The pain in his shoulder told him though that they had definitely been there however. Kakukaku, what to do, what to do? How will you get out of this mess, sensei? The voice mocked Sarutobi from all around. Before the old man could respond he felt something wet drop onto his shoulder. A hissing sound followed and he turned to see his protective shoulder pad being melted away. Looks like I have to finish this fast. Sarutobi sighed as he slowly inched his way across the bottom of the snake's insides, keeping an eye at the top which continued to drop more of the corrosive liquid. Finish this fast. Oh no, I intend to mu nice and slow, sensei. Make you suffer for not being brave enough to face me the first time. Orochimaru broke into another fit of laughter. Just as he did, Sarutobi ran through a set of seals. Kaiten, Gokakyu no Jutsu. He immediately released a giant fireball deeper into the snake's body. No. Orochimaru's upper body suddenly sprung forth from the top, his hands outstretched. They wrapped around his sensei's en. How dare you scorch this place? The Sannin shrieked. That was your biggest flaw, Orochimaru. You were too why. Sarutobi choked out as he grabbed onto his student's arms and yanked at him. Orochimaru was pulled completely from the wall just as the sound of something coming from the direction the fireball went reached their ears. What is that? What did you do? Orochimaru yelled. Sarutobi laughed. You'll see, my foolish student. This isn't working. Asuma yelled as the house he had been hiding behind got devoured by the massive snake. Just what kind of half-assed genjutsu are you using? He shouted as he immediately began moving to another hiding space. You try putting the Lord of Snakes under a genjutsu sometime. Kurenai's forehead throbbed as she screamed back at him. It's not as easy as it looks. Enough arguing. Something is happening, Enma said as he gazed curiously at the snake that had quit moving. Its end suddenly began convulsing as it seemed ready to throw up. What's happening? Kurenai asked in awe. Manda opened his mouth wide and let out a loud burp, blowing Orochimaru and Sarutobi from the snake's mouth. No way, Enma wanted to smack his face. Only Sarutobi would think of making a snake burp to free himself. Asuma sighed and immediately lit up a cigarette. I deny all relations to you. Even Kurenai's sweat dropped. I may have just lost some respect for you, Hokage-sama. Sarutobi, however, was in no mode for jokes. Asuma, attack while its mouth is open. Damn. Asuma threw down his just-lit cigarette. He immediately jumped so he was level with the snake and pointed his chakra blade so it was facing the snake's mouth. Say goodnight. The wind blade shot forward and pierced Manda through the roof of his mouth, shooting it out the top of the giant snake's head. Manda immediately vanished in a cloud of smoke. You bastard! Orochimaru screamed as he landed on the ground. Before he could charge at Asuma, Hiruzen landed in front of him. Not a step closer to my son. He shouted as he buried his fist inside the Sanin's chin, knocking him into a collapsed building. Orochimaru slowly stumbled to his feet. I'm going to rip you apart. He seethed before suddenly pausing. His eyes were on something behind Sarutobi. The Hokage turned around to see a blasted-looking Temari sitting on her butt in front of a pile of rubble. Haku, Dosu, and finally Zabuza landed next to her. The swordsman gazed at Sarutobi in a way of apology. We're not interrupting, are we? He asked as blandly as he could. What is this? Orochimaru asked as he got to his feet. Not only is a Kanoiki from Sunagakuwa here, but so is my own henchman. Former henchman. Dosu suddenly shouted. You would have left me for S just like Kabuto did. Orochimaru's face twisted into a cruel snare. I saved your life. It was mine to do with as I pleased. His mouth opened and a dozen kunai fired from it, right at the group. Zabuza stepped in between them and the kunai and swung his sword. We'll get going, Hokage-sama. Zabuza said as he formed a seal. A thick mist blew into the area. Sarutobi nodded. Good. Leave this to us. He turned back to his student. Smooth move, shorty. Just provoke him some more. Temari whispered at Dosu as they quickly moved through the mist. Going through the village had been slow for the group as they had to sneak around in order to avoid fighting all of the Zakis. When they had all begun moving to the first gate, they immediately went to the fourth in hopes of finding no more enemies. Instead they stumbled upon the Hokage's battle of all the ones to stumble into. I'm not the one that slipped and fell down the rubble when I saw him. I wouldn't have had to say anything if not for you. Dosu whispered back. This technique only works if you idiots are quiet. Zabuza was beginning to wonder why he had wanted a genin team at all right about now. And just where do you think you're going? Orochimaru asked from right in front of them. Zabuza sighed. You see, he was already swinging his sword forward. Orochimaru's sword met his and a loud clang alerted the others to the presence of them all. Go! Zabuza shouted as he pushed back Orochimaru's blade. You go too. Sarutobi appeared with Enma who was back in staff mode. Shut down Abumizaku. Right. All four of them shouted as they finally ran past the gates of the village. I won't let you. Orochimaru shouted as his body began lurching. His feet transformed and heads began sprouting from his shoulders. Meanwhile, his arms seemed to melt into his torso as his body began to grow bigger and bigger. His transformation finished just as the mist cleared. Yamata no Jutsu. The giant eight-headed snake roared as it stared down at Sarutobi. You foolish student. Sarutobi stared up at the giant snake with pure pity in his eyes. Sarutobi, what are you going to do against that thing? It's huge. Bigger than Manda. Enma shouted as the eye appeared again. I have no choice, Sarutobi said as he placed Enma down. Shiki Fujin. He began to form seals. No, you can't. That jutsu will KO you. Asuma yelled as he landed next to him. That's right. Kurenai also appeared. You're the Hokage. Before they could argue any more, the snakeheads began to strike. There is no choice, Sarutobi shouted as he jumped and ducked around the giant heads that S into the ground. What other way is there to defeat an immortal? I have a better suggestion. The snakeheads quit attacking and everyone turned their heads in surprise at the sound of the new voice. There wasn't just one man standing there though. A whole army of shinobi stood behind the man with white and blue robes that had spoke. His short, brown hair blew gently in the wind. Sarutobi opened and closed his mouth. He then opened it back up. Kazekage Dono. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.